Discontented Ghost, Chapter 10. My days were now in agony of suspenseful fidgeting as I waited for some word from Lady Eleanor as to my fate. Was there a chance of my escaping from Canterville Chase, or was I doomed to stay on forever? Now that I had finally faced my true feelings about the place, I longed for release, like a soul in torment. One morning, having pretty well recovered from my cold, I was standing at my window, idly surveying the ancestral acres and wishing I had something to do, when I saw a messenger approaching on a bicycle. Thinning myself out, I slipped into the hallway and down the stairs, curious to know what the message might be. It was shameful to be reduced to such mere busybody activities, but I welcomed anything that might pass some time. As I had expected at that hour, I found the minister sitting alone in the black leather-covered armchair, growling over his morning newspaper. In a moment, Shadwell, the butler, entered with a stately tread and a silver salver upon which rested a yellow envelope. "This has just arrived for you, sir." "Thank you, Shadwell. If there is an answer to be sent, I will call you." Shadwell withdrew, and the minister opened his telegram, obviously expecting nothing of great importance. His eyes scanned the contents. "Oh, God," roared Mr. Otis, and he fell back in his chair like a stricken man. His outcry was so desperate it brought Wash into the room, on the run. Pa, what is the matter?" The minister pointed feebly to the telegram, which had fluttered to the floor from his nervous fingers. Wash snatched it up and read it. "No!" He staggered like a man who had taken a bullet, as once again the wire fluttered to the floor. "What is it, Washington?" Drawn to the scene as well as by her husband's distress signal, Mrs. Otis entered the room. Wash had moved to the mantelpiece and was clutching it for support. Noticing the telegram, his mother stooped with a graceful movement, picked it up, and read. With commendable forethought, Wash turned and hurried to her side, reaching her just in time. "Oh," moaned Mrs. Otis, and swooned into her son's arms. He swept her up and deposited her gently on a sofa. He was kneeling beside her, patting her wrist and saying, Mother, are you all right?" when Virginia came hurrying in. She helped Wash bring their mother around, all the while asking, "What happened? Wash, what is it?" In answer, he pointed silently. Once more, the telegram was retrieved, read, and dropped. Oh, no. Virginia sat down with a thump and burst into a storm of tears. By this time, the minister had recovered himself enough to struggle out of his chair and totter to his wife's side. "Come, we must help your mother to her room. For that matter, we will all need some time to pull ourselves together. We are in no condition to discuss this matter now," he said grimly, as he and Wash raised Mrs. Otis to her feet. "In half an hour, let us gather here again to decide what will be done." With Virginia following, still weeping stormily, they helped the half-conscious woman from the room. I had never been more surprised. I had thought nothing in the world or out of it could upset that family. What crushing blow had fallen on the house of Otis to provoke such a response as this? Had they lost all their money? Had the American minister been summoned home to Washington in disgrace? I wasted no time in having a look at the fatal message. It was brief. "Arrive Ascot, 5:36 p.m. Stop. Send carriage. Stop. Henry Benton." Henry Benton? Who was Henry Benton? And why should the simple news of his impending arrival throw the Otis family into such a state of shock? Before I had time to do more than scan the message, however, I heard the great front door open with a bang and the sound of familiar footsteps. I barely had time to withdraw to a corner of the room before they rushed in, merry as grigs. I had let go of the message so convulsively that it was still in the midst of its fifth flutter to the floor when they arrived. "Cool, what's that blowing around?" "Looks like a telegram. Let's have a look." Johnny pounced on it, and they both struggled to hold it. "Come on, let me read it." Stop pulling. Now I can't read it. But then they both did read it, and this time the wire fluttered to the floor from 4 hands, and they stared at each other. I think I'm going to be sick, said Ronnie. So am I, said Johnny, and they made an urgent exit toward the great outdoors. Now, I was really impressed. I went to my perch on the bookcase and settled down to wait. When the elder Otises reassembled, the wisdom of the recess ordered by the minister was evident. Mrs. Otis was pale, but composed. Virginia had subdued her tears. Wash and his father had commanded themselves. Faces were long, but at least under control. The minister made the opening address. Maybe we should all pack up and get out of here while we can, he said, but this suggestion was immediately cried down. I can't leave now, said Virginia passionately. I won't. Nor I, blurted Wash. Then he grew self-conscious under his father's sharp glance and added lamely, I like it here. I will not be driven from my own home, said Mrs. Otis, and she looked as annoyed as I had ever seen her. Really, it's not fair. Everyone thought your cousin Henry was safely settled in Haiti, pursuing his study of that wretched voodooism he became so interested in. Whatever made him come to England now, of all times? What do you think? Snorted the minister. Somehow he heard I had bought this place, and one thing we do know, once he sees this house, with all of its creature comforts, we won't get him out of it for months and months. Henry Benton is a professional house guest. He spent years of his life in other people's homes, including ours, and he's the very worst of the lot, said Minister Otis, warming up to his subject. Even though he's my own flesh and blood, I'll say it. He's the most obnoxious person I've ever known. Once he gets his foot in the door, he's impossible to get rid of until he's good and ready to go, as we all know. Nothing phases him. Hints, insults, even threats. And you know we can't go too far in that line. Anyway, as long as the matter of Aunt Julia's trust fund remains unsettled. He could be very troublesome in that area if he became provoked enough to make the effort. No, he has us at his mercy. Unless we flee at once and go live in some Welsh village under assumed names, I don't see what we can do but bite the bullet. Virginia burst out again. But we can't have him here. We can't, she stormed. Then she took a deep breath and began to choose her words more carefully. Mama has invited the Duke of Cheshire down for a visit. Now, I know I'm too young to think of marriage, and I'm not in love with him or anything like that at all, but still, just supposing that someday I might fall in love with him, and he might fall in love with me, and we might decide to marry. Virginia's mother, I noted, was listening to these suppositions without the slightest appearance of disapproval. It would have been a strange American mother of that day and age who would have opposed a possible connection with one of Britain's oldest, noblest, and wealthiest families. I'm not saying we will, just that someday we might, continued Virginia. But if Cousin Henry is here when Cecil visits us, that day will never come, because Cousin Henry will butt into everything, and make his terrible jokes, and because nobody in his right mind would marry a girl if he knew Cousin Henry was part of her family, she concluded, and burst into tears again. Hear, hear, said Wash in a low voice. A gloom that was almost palpable settled over the gathering. I can see him now, swilling down my best wine, taking a fistful of my best cigars. One for now and a couple for later, with a glass in my room before bedtime, mused the minister, mimicking a voice even more rasping than his own, if he was doing it justice. I can hear him making remarks about my personal appearance, as though I were still 10 years old, groaned Wash. And he'll probably still call me Washy. I don't even want to think about what he'll say to me, declared Virginia with a shudder. What about you, Lucretia? Mrs. Otis raised a beautiful, tragic face. It reminded one of the face of Mary, Queen of Scots, on her way to the scaffold. There are not many things in this life I cannot stand, Hiram, she said, but one of them is your cousin Henry. The American minister bowed his head. I have always been grateful to you for marrying me in spite of him, he said. His conduct at our wedding, well, There's no point in raking up painful memories. And then they began to say over again most of the things they had already said, as people always do when they find themselves faced with an impossible situation. But I was no longer listening. My mind was otherwise occupied, seething with possibilities, churning with half-formulated plans that rapidly took place. The Otises were also wrapped in their own unhappy thoughts and their fruitless discussion that none of them noticed the shape which was firming up in a corner of the library. Not until I stepped forward did they glance around. Not till then did the 4 pairs of eyes grow suddenly round. "Good morning," I said in an icy tone. "I have a proposition to advance." In this instance, I was not in costume, of course, but was wearing the ordinary ruff, doublet, and hose of an Elizabethan gentleman. There was nothing of the grisly, the nauseous, or the gruesome about my appearance, yet it drew a considerably more gratifying response than had been the case on all past occasions. All 4 Otises started up out of their chairs and gaped at me. Their despair had obviously lowered their resistance to shocks. "Bless my soul, it's the ghost!" cried the minister. "Good heavens," said Mrs. Otis. "I must confess, sir, you startled me." It was Virginia who recovered the most quickly. "Sir Simon, have you been listening to our conversation?" "I have. That is why I decided to reveal myself under a flag of truce, so to speak. You shall put the matter of your cousin Henry in my hands, in return for which you shall agree never again to meddle in my affairs in any way, but allow me to discharge my duties in this household unmolested. I'll say one thing for Yankees, they are quick to sense a good bargain." Rapid glances flashed among them, a wild hope kindled in their eyes, and Minister Otis turned with a bow that was almost obsequious. "Take a chair, sir, please do." "I prefer to stand," I said severely, and folded my arms on my chest. "Pray be seated, all of you." "As you wish, sir," said the minister, popping into a chair. He gazed at me wonderingly. "By George, you know, the way you look right now, you could almost be a normal human being if it weren't for those funny clothes." "Funny?" "Oh, I don't mean funny. I just mean, well, different. Do I take it you have a plan for ridding us of our unwanted guest?" "I do. And do you accept my terms?" "Oh, yes." "All of you?" 3 eager voices joined the ministers in assent. "But can you speak for the twins as well?" "Oh, you bet we can. Why, if you can handle Cousin Henry, you'll be their hero for life. He is the only person in the world who has ever consistently made their lives miserable." "We are agreed, then. Now as to your cousin. From a remark Mrs. Otis made earlier, I gather that his avocation has been the study of voodoo religion in Haiti." The minister nodded. "Up to his ears." "Oh, his ears do not matter. It is his Achilles heel that we are interested in, and I think we may have found it. He arrives on the 5:36 train this evening at Ascot, I believe. In that case, we haven't much time, and everyone will have to help. Just say the word. We shall leave nothing to chance. We shall build this evening into a full production, such as only I, Sir Simon de Canterville, can create. Each of you will be players in it, and I expect nothing less than peak performances from all concerned." For the first time, the minister looked uncertain. "You may count on all of us, I'm sure," he said, glancing at the others, "but it's a lot to ask of the twins." "It is indeed," I agreed, "and for that reason the parlor maids Sheila and Bridget will take them to the seashore for a brief holiday. The twins will like that, and it will do Bridget's nerves a world of good. I would suggest Brighton. In fact, we shall immediately send all the servants on holiday except Mrs. Umney." "Mrs. Umney? But will she—" "Oh, leave Mrs. Umney to me. She has more courage and resources than you might think, and we shall need her. And now our preparations must begin, for there is not a moment to lose. Washington, the first task is yours." "Yes, sir." "Go fetch that foul detergent stick of yours and get to work on the great front door," I told him. I want every trace of oil removed from its hinges.